All right, friends, so let's settle into our time together tonight. And the theme for tonight is just to, again, tonight and next week, to just summarize or pull together some of the themes that we've been talking about the last couple of months about mindfulness and wisdom. Wisdom, this capacity we have to settle down, settle in the system, to see clearly what's happening, and to see clearly what is wholesome, what will lead to ease and peace in the mind and the heart, and what can lead to more agitation and struggle. And so in the meditation tonight, I'll invite some experimentation. In the Facebook description yesterday, Andrea always posts a little bit of a Facebook blurb. I said, you know, what are we cooking up in our wisdom laboratory? It's like we can really bring some lightness to this, and some fun and some experimentation. And there's no right or wrong. There's just trying out what works. Ehipasiko, the Buddha said. Come and see for yourself. Come and check it out. And so I'll invite some experimentation in the meditation tonight. And you can see just what happens for yourself. We're just learning what feels good to the system, what tastes good. And so let's just begin by recognizing the Sangha and letting the Sangha kind of settle in, letting ourselves settle into the Sangha, and to see if that helps to settle the system in any way. We can take refuge in the Buddha, remembering that this capacity is in our own hearts. Sense if there's any kind of settling there, any kind of, just a little bit of relief, or a little bit of, oh yeah. Take refuge in the teachings, remembering that we have this refuge, and just remembering that can be like a, oh, kind of a, can be a little refreshment, can be a little reminder, can help the system to ease a little bit. Yes, yes, we have these tools, these teachings. And then taking refuge in the Sangha, in the community, our community here that's holding and caring for each one of us right now, each one of us precious here. In the larger communities of our neighborhoods and friends, and the community of Treaty 6, and the community of nature. Which supports us right here with this breath. And so settling into the breath, the body, sensing the whole body. Feeling the support of the chair. And seeing if there's any sense, and any, just even a small sense as you turn to the body, any small sense of settling, any small sense of arriving, any small sense of calming. Noticing this capacity we have to be mindful of the body. Just bringing that awareness in, that we have this capacity for mindfulness, to really see what's happening and to monitor in a way, gently monitor the effect of our meditation on our system. this capacity of mindfulness, which is maybe the key, or certainly one of the big keys to our practice. We have this capacity. Just seeing if there's what happens just when you realize that or recognize that. And sensing the breath. Comes in the nostrils and fills the lungs. Sensing it in the side body against the arms. Feeling the breath in the back as it expands against the chair. A little gentle lifting maybe of the shoulders. We can ask ourselves, is there any way that I can experience this breath in a way that is pleasant? It might be the fact that we can rest in and let the breath breathe all by itself. There might be a subtle pleasure in realizing we can let go and we don't have to control the breath. Or an image might be helpful for you. I often think of an ocean, the gentle swell rising and falling, ebbing and flowing. What happens in the system if you can touch a little bit of pleasantness, a little bit of ease? The mind will think, move to thinking, and come back all by itself. This is another kind of ebb and flow. There might be a little pleasantness in letting go of trying to control the thinking. When the attention comes back, that's when we can respond with kindness, with mindfulness. Monitoring with our mindfulness the effect in the system of letting go of controlling the thoughts, of resting in that ebb and flow. letting go of a striving, perhaps, a pushing, perhaps. And then resting back into the body and the breath. And again, is there any pleasantness there? What effect does that have on the system? Just experimenting with what helps you to settle, helps the system to settle. If there is any even small sense of stilling, of stillness or calmness in any part of your system, seeing if you can notice, feel into that calming and the pleasantness of that calming. Maybe at the end of the exhale, there's a heaviness in the body that feels calm, or maybe the breath feels a little calming, or the body. Sense into the pleasantness of that and see what happens then to the calming. Just using our capacity to see clearly the effect of our efforts, our gentle, wise efforts. Thank you everyone for your practice. Of course, we've just had an experiment in the meditation laboratory, seeing what we could understand and learn as we monitored our experience with mindfulness. So I've called this talk the Wisdom Experiment, because we can bring some fun and lightness and curiosity to this experiment, this wisdom exploration. And I have a quote here from Venerable Analayo about this. He says, based on sufficient acquaintance with the teachings to serve the purpose of orientation, which we all have, we've had a basic orientation to the teachings, we investigate what's happening with mindfulness. We try out one possible solution. On finding that this does not work, we try something else. Anybody had that happen? This is not working. Sooner or later, he says, something will work. Even if it's hanging in until impermanence does its thing. In future, we know then how to deal with this situation based on our own investigation and experience. We learn to trust ourselves and our ability as meditators. This is the fruit of our own investigation, based on having cultivated a clear distinction between what is wholesome or skillful or kusala in Pali, and what is unwholesome or unskillful, akusala. And in the meditation tonight, I felt some settling, and I noticed that settling, and that seemed to deepen it. That seemed to lead in a kusala kind of direction. I'd also noticed some thoughts, and even though I know differently, I started to think those thoughts and not like those thoughts and resist those thoughts. And that seemed to lead in an akusala direction. And so next time I'll get to try again. And next time the thoughts come in and I notice myself start to think them, I may be able to interrupt them more readily and come back to the body and the breath, something that can be calming. And so it's about experimenting. And it feels to me like, if you're in the kitchen and you're cooking and you can experiment with what goes into a dish, and next time that didn't work so well, and next time, oh, that worked really well. Doris could tell us about this. I know she's a good cook. I know that firsthand. So I have a sutta about this. Actually, no, I've got a little thing I want to share screen with you. This is something that Andrea found yesterday to illustrate this cooking idea. This is the Swedish cook in the kitchen experimenting. I don't know, what does that Swedish cook sing? I'm not sure, but we can bring this kind of energy into our laboratory, into our experimenting, into our kitchen, our wisdom kitchen. And I have a sutta called The Cook, the Sutta called The Cook. And I'm going to read it to you. So here's the Sutta, The Cook. And this is talking about two kinds of cooks. One kind of cook is an unwise cook, a foolish cook. This unwise cook cooks for the king. And so this cook is cooking with all kinds of curry and sours and bitters and there's all different kinds of curries: sour curries, bitter curries, peppery curries, sweet curries, alkaline and non-alkaline curries, salty and non-salty curry. But he does not take note of how the king responds. And so he just goes on making the curries, but he doesn't notice. And so as a result, because of this, he doesn't pick up on the likes or the theme of his own, of the king. And then in the same way, there could be a meditator who is meditating, is doing mind, but not paying attention to what's happening inside. They may remain, they may be focused on the body. Their mind may become concentrated or not. The hindrances may be abandoned or not, but he does not, or they do not take note of the fact. They remain focused, or they don't remain focused on the feelings, just kind of not monitoring. And as a result, that practitioner is not rewarded with a pleasant abiding here and now. The same way the other cook wasn't rewarded by the king with higher wages and all this, this meditator is not rewarded with pleasant abiding here and now or with mindfulness and alertness. Why not? Because this unwise meditator isn't taking note of their own mind. But then there's the other case where there's a wise cook who is cooking for the king and cooking all these curries, sour ones and bitter ones and peppery ones and sweet ones and alkaline, non-alkaline, salty, non-salty. And he takes note of the king, thinking, oh, today the king likes this curry. Today he or she, could be a queen, is reaching for that curry. Or they take a lot of this curry and they really praise that curry. Today the king mostly likes the sour curry, so they watch. And as a result, the king rewards them with higher wages and praise. And then there's the wise meditator who is mindful of feelings in and of themselves, mindful of mental qualities, mindful of the sense of being settled, mindful of when they're settled and when they're not. And as a result, they are rewarded with a pleasant abiding here and now, together with mindfulness and alertness. Why is that? Because the wise meditator picks up on the theme of his own mind. And so this is what we want to practice in the kitchen. And you know, I've had some insights into cooking over the years. One of my insights is that conditions are never the same. No matter, you might be cooking the same dish, but conditions are never the same. My sister's the expert in our family on Yorkshire pudding. And yet she knows conditions are never the same. And over the years, we could never quite figure out what goes into making the Yorkshire pudding rise like a mushroom or fall like a hockey puck. We've hypothesized, you know, is it heating up the oven a little bit hotter and then putting the pudding in? Is it heating up the oil first? Is it beating it really, really, all these things? We're not quite sure. So every condition is different. Every time, it's always different. Conditions are always changing. It's never the same. And also the second one I've kind of come to is that it's best to go with the flow if you can. Because no matter what you do, if something doesn't turn out the way you want it to, it doesn't help to kind of wish it were the way you wished it was. this is the one thing I remember big time was when I tried to make, actually I have many stories in this department of cooking. But one time I tried to make an angel food cake, and it was, I mean, I had the egg whites whipped really high and carefully, and folded the ingredients in, and I cooked it. And as I watched it cooking, it it just, instead of making an angel food cake, it just made us what I called later a shortcake. And it was to put strawberries on top of, so I called it a shortcake. And when I took it to my friend's birthday party, instead of pretending it was an angel food cake, I just called it a shortcake. And they didn't know, they were just really happy with that. They were really pleased with that. So if we can, you know, in a way, go with the flow of things, it can save a lot of struggle and save a lot of suffering. Now, I know that that's not the way it is in life all the time. We can't always, you know, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. This teaching isn't that naive, but it's like, this is the way it is. This is a strawberry shortcake. This is not an angel food cake. And so that was one second insight I had in the kitchen. The third insight I had in the kitchen was that if you can go with a little bit of a looser sense of your role in the kitchen, then things can be a lot easier and more fun and light. If I had an image of myself having to be a really good cook, I'd be a little bit in trouble. You know, if I had that identity of having to be a good cook. Because that one time I made that brown sugar icing that my mom always made and made look so easy. First time I went to make brown sugar icing, you cook it. It's a kind of icing that you cook. And, you know, I cooked it, and I didn't know when to stop cooking it. Like when it was, you know, I didn't know when to stop cooking it so that it would be the right consistency. So I cooked it and cooked it and cooked it, thinking, because it was too runny. And I cooked it and cooked it. I think I cooked it for about like 10 minutes, maybe longer. And then I thought, well, it's got to be done now. And so I started to spoon it out on the cake. And before I got it out of the pan, it was like stiff, like steel. like, and I managed to get it out of the pan before it like adhered to the pot. Irretrievably. But it was like halfway spread over the cake. And when I, like moments later, when I tapped it with my knife to try to spread it more, it was like tapping your knife on a steel pot. Like it was so hard. And so I served that to my mom as her birthday cake. And I just called it, you know, a decoration instead of icing. And so I was happy that I wasn't really attached to myself as having an identity as a good cook, or that would cause me some suffering. And so what happened as a result of that, as a result of not being all tied up in knots about not having the perfect icing, I got to experience something underneath that. And that was still the sense of love that I was offering to my mom, and the sense of care, and the sense of connection. You know, she shared with me some of her cooking failures. I don't even want to call it a failure, cooking experiments. And I got to see that, yeah, I'm not alone. This is kind of a universal human condition. Has anybody else had like an experiment in the kitchen that went awry? I'm not alone. And so in insight meditation, the insights, what we're doing in insight meditation is settling our system so that we can also have insights. and the insights that we can have. In fact, insight meditation is called insight meditation because we want to cultivate this settling of the system and then this clear seeing so that we can have insights. And these can be insights, psychological insights into our own patterns of mind and heart, or they can be what we could call the core, 3 core insights, wisdom insights of the practice. And the Pali word for insight is vipassana meditation. And so when you hear that, that's also translated as insight or clear seeing. And the 3 insights are the ones that I've actually just described that I had into my cooking experiments. The first is that conditions are always changing. And we see this as soon as we begin to meditate. We see this insight. The mind is always changing. The thoughts are coming and going. States are coming and going. Has anyone seen this insight? Yeah. And now what often can happen with this insight is actually, and what the Buddha said is that if this insight can be unsatisfying, because we want some ground to stand on. And this is actually the second insight, is that, it can be unsatisfying. And then how we respond to this unsatisfactoriness determines whether we compound it or whether we can go with strawberry shortcake instead of angel food cake. Unsatisfactory, no angel food cake. I could have gotten really in a knot about that. And this isn't to trivialize the knots that we can get into in our lives over major things. But if we start with small things like angel food cake, small things, and notice the mechanism, notice the wisdom with which we can relate to those things that don't go the way we want them to, then that can train the mind and the heart to help us in the big things. And so this is the second insight, is to what happens when, how do we relate to this unsatisfactoriness of the constantly changing conditions in our life. Our body's changing, our body's aging, our body is subject to change, relationships are subject to change, our work is subject to change, our moods are subject to change. And so how we relate to this is really the Four Noble Truths that we talked about last week. Can we relate to this changing circumstance with a steadiness, with an allowing, with letting it be a changing circumstance, and finding our steadiness and wise response in the midst of that? And then the third is that in this impermanence, in this inconstancy, and this unsatisfactoriness, one of the things that we try to glom onto and hang on tight to is our sense of self being permanent. And in the cooking insight, it's like me as a good cook. But that's not going to happen probably in this lifetime. I like to cook, but I won't say I'm a good cook. And so if we can loosen the sense of identity, loosen the sense of self, loosen the sense of separateness, of having to hang on to it being myself, me being a certain way, then we can have some little bit of freedom. We can sense into the universal human experience in this unsatisfactory changing condition. That this is a universal shared experience. We're not alone. It's not our fault. And there's some sense of release in that. So Gil Fronsdal has offered something that I want to offer now. Just that in this impermanence, as we settle in our meditation, what we're settling we settle in order to see the impermanence. We settle our system in meditation in order to help ourselves become more familiar with this changing experience. And if we try to stop the thoughts, notice what happens when we try to stop the thought. When we struggle against the state, what happens when we struggle against that state? And that's what can cause some strife or some suffering. So we cultivate a stillness, a steadiness, in order to see more clearly the inconstancy of things, the impermanence of things. And then he says also we cultivate a quiet joy, quiet happiness, in order to help counteract that unsatisfactoriness, counteract that suffering that we meet. And so we cultivate stillness in order to be steady with it. We cultivate happiness and joy. In meditation tonight, we were looking for, is there any pleasantness here? So we cultivate that pleasantness. We cultivate that happiness in order to help our systems be steadier in this changing, in the face of this, of any suffering that we encounter. And as we do that, we can cultivate a sense of confidence that we have something to meet this. And as we settle into that sense of confidence, that can help us to let go of the ways that we hang on to our identity of having to be perfect at something, having to be really good at something. So as we cultivate confidence, we can let go in a way and see the times when our sense of self can be a little bit looser, a little bit less tight. And so what are we cooking in the kitchen? We're cooking wisdom in the kitchen. And again, I want to bring Gil Fronsdal in because he offers a recipe, a very simple recipe. And this recipe is 4 words, which I'll explain. This recipe is 4 steps in this recipe. The first is be, the second is see, the third is free, and the fourth is we. And so the first step of be is that we just let ourselves be and cultivate a sense of calmness and settledness as we let ourselves be in this moment, in the body, in the breath. As we cultivate this being, then we begin to be able to see more clearly what's happening in this changing circumstance. And as we're able to see more clearly what happens, we can see the ways to help ourselves be more free of patterns that lead us into more struggle and move us into more freedom. The patterns of the mind that lead us into unwholesome states or into wholesome states, and let us be more free. As Michael Saborsky says, we can breathe right here, we can sit right here, right now, noticing what's here, noticing what's happening, and then we can breathe in a more free way because we're present. And then the last one is we. And as we settle and let things be, as we see more clearly, as we see ways to let ourselves be more free, then the fourth in the we is that we can have a sense of expanded self, a sense that I'm not alone, a sense of the self loosening a little bit, a sense of the universal human condition, a sense that we are together in this. And there can be a little loosening of the striving of trying to make it a certain way, trying to make the angel food cake be, or the strawberry shortcake be angel food cake, trying to make the busy mind calm down. What's the wise way to work with that and help ourselves be free, even with a busy mind, is to notice, oh, busy mind. And then we can have a busy mind with more freedom. And so this is Gil Fronsdal's recipe for wisdom in the kitchen. Be, see, free, and we. And so I'll close with Hafiz, a poem by Hafiz. And I can't remember the name of this poem, but he says, it's an excerpt from the poem. And he says, you carry all the ingredients to turn your existence into joy. Mix them. Mix them. You carry all the ingredients to turn your existence into joy. Mix them. Mix them. So let's sit for a moment. So let's dedicate the merit of our practice tonight. And I feel like very moved by just sensing into the Sangha and sensing into the collective wisdom here. And so as we dedicate this merit, just let yourself settle into your own body and breath. Just feel into the wisdom of that simple action. Let your mindfulness monitor that simple wisdom. May our practice here today extend out and touch all beings. May all beings come to know conditions for wisdom and happiness. May our practice ripple out and be a cause and condition for peace, wisdom, and liberation in the hearts and minds of all beings everywhere. Thank you, everybody, for your practice.